2051, The Battle Over Nothing. Earth, Arizona Desert Nothing, Main Street, 2051.09.07, 0803. Lieutenant Colonel Samantha Crichton was not a happy camper. She and her troops, a scraped-together bunch of misfits, were in the middle of nowhere, and they were chasing a rumor. Brushing her red hair from her green eyes, she checked the map again. Tilda, this should be the place. Tilda, she sighed as she looked around. Nothing, Arizona was a collection of abandoned houses. When the war had begun, people had flocked to the dot on the map because, well, it was just a dot on the map. There was nothing special about nothing. It was strategically unimportant. There was nothing even remotely worth conquering nearby, and no government had signed off on its creation. It just was. But the rumor was that the war had eventually found nothing. A large group of augments had rolled into town, and the locals had fled. The story was that the augments had stayed for a couple of months before packing up and moving on. Crichton's orders were to find out if the augments had been here, and if they had, what exactly they had been up to. But all she was finding were hastily abandoned houses. There were also empty caravans, tents, and even some houseboats. Tilda, how did those boats even get here? Tilda, she put the map away and turned to her second-in-command. Well, Cap, we've landed into another fine mess. What else is new? Captain Alexander Xander began. So, tell me you have a plan. I'm working on it. Crichton led her troops down what passed for Main Street around nothing. In truth, it was just a path made out of wooden boards that connected the houses. As they reached the edge of town, Crichton looked back to make sure all of her people were still around. Besides Captain Xander, she had 4 more set of hands, and each of them had a reason for ending up under her command. Xander was a Caucasian man with blue eyes and blonde hair. At 1.95 meters, he was taller than Crichton. The reason he was in this unit was simple. Alexander Xander was an augment, but his mother had escaped the labs where he was created and hidden him from the scientists. He had not learned about his true nature until his medical exam for the U.S. Army. The Army had wanted to throw him in jail, but one of their generals, David Anderson, had prevented that. Anderson was the one who had assembled Crichton's little team of misfits. In the years since, Xander had impressed the right people and climbed the ranks to his current position. Next came Private Denise Rodriguez and A8. Rodriguez was the unit's communications officer. Her hobby was robotics. She had been on edge for being kicked out for using Army resources to build a robot. Said robot was A8. It was built out of whatever Rodriguez had been able to get her hands on. It was very handy for carrying heavy weapons and the communications gear. Covering the rear were First Lieutenant John Shepard and Sergeant Margaret Maggie Benton. Shepard was the unit's pilot. He had brought the unit to nothing aboard Huey helicopter called Olivia. His reason for being here was simple: he had volunteered. This was not true for Maggie Benton. Sergeant Benton had assigned here by Anderson, despite not waiting the job. But the unit had needed a medic, and that had been the end of it. Okay, let's head. That was far as she got before the sound of a cannon swallowed her breath. 3 seconds later, one of the houses exploded as the shell hit. Move. They all bolted out of the small town as more shells annihilated more of the structures. This got them out of the line of fire in the short terms, but created 2 long-term problems. Their helicopter was parked on the other side of town if the attackers hadn't destroyed her yet, and the area around nothing was completely flat. This meant that there was 0 cover for the unit. Behind them, the last house exploded. Colonel, Shepard began, 2 o'clock, there's something there. Following Shepard's direction, Crichton spotted what appeared to be a well. However, as they approached it, she realized that it was instead an air shaft. The shaft was 3 layers of bricks high, with a green metal hatch sealed with a padlock. That's not on the map, Benton said. Looks like we may have found what our augment friends were up to, Crichton said. Or the locals did a little illegal mining to keep the town on its feet. Either way, it's better than staying up here as sitting ducks. She grabbed a large pair of pliers from A8's back and handed it to Xander. Captain, if you would. Yes, ma'am. Xander cut through the lock and opened the hatch. He took out a flashlight and gave the shaft a good look. Looks like our well is an air shaft that doubles as an emergency exit. I've got a ladder leading to a tunnel. Good enough for me. Rodriguez, once we're in the tunnel, break out the M240. Rodriguez nodded in acknowledgement. Shepard, how many grenades do we have? 4. I haven't had a chance to restock since that mess in Mexico. It'll have to do. Set up a pair of bolos on the ladder. Colonel, Benton said, we've got incoming. Crichton looked back at the town. An M1 Abrams tank came rolling into view. Tilda Crichton signaled to the team to hurry. Xander had already climbed down the ladder and was securing the tunnel. Benton and Rodriguez slid down the ladder while A8 began climbing. It was at this point that she noticed a blue star with a red border on the tank. Mad Rick, great. Explains why it's an Abrams. Mad Rick's troops only have outdated gear. Shepard said as he entered the shaft and closed the hatch. Richard McKinley, known as Mad Rick, was a self-declared colonel who had seen the chaos of the war as a chance for Texas to become an independent republic once more. At first, he had enjoyed plenty of support. But then it had been revealed that the colonel had never served in any armed force. Further scandals had torpedoed his reputation, and these days most Texans considered Mad Rick and his followers crackpots. The last briefing on his group had said that they had been driven out of Texas. The National Guard had found McKinley's base, and the Air Force had bombed it off the map. But intelligence had said there had been survivors. Now they knew where they had gone. As Crichton climbed down, Shepard took 2 grenades and connected them using a tripwire. He then connected them to the hatch. Whoever opened the hatch would be blown to pieces. He set up a second trap halfway down the ladder, then finished his climb. In the meanwhile, Rodriguez had removed a large machine gun from A8's back. The tunnel was dark, so they all took out their flashlights and turned them on. Crichton made a hand signal, and Xander took the lead. So now what? Shepard asked. That depends on what's on the end of this tunnel. They made their way down the tunnel, which sloped down as it went along. Crichton looked for security features, but there were none. The tunnel took a turn left, followed by a turn right. Then they reached a set of big metal doors. Well, that explains why there's no security. Tilda Crichton knew blast doors when she saw them. Well, this is anticlimactic, Benton said. An explosion echoed through the tunnel. Mad Rick's forces had found the tunnel entrance. What they hadn't found was Shepard's second booby trap, because a second explosion followed seconds later. Rodriguez and Shepard set up the M240. If this was going to be their last stand, they were going to make Mad Rick bleed as much as they could. Colonel, Xander said, now would be a really good time for a plan. They had some C4, but using it was not an option. Besides, they might need it for whatever was on the other side of the door. Looking around, she spotted a keypad next to one of the doors. It had 10 keys and a USB port. A8, you're up. =/back/= yes, Colonel. =/back/= the robot said. A8 never spoke up unless spoken to. The robot limbs were prosthetics, with the head and torso having been put together from scraped-together parts. A8 plugged in and began running through the permutations of the code to open the door. As he did his thing, the first enemy soldiers came into sight. Rodriguez cut loose with the machine gun, forcing them to retreat. Flashlight off, masks on, Crichton said. Rodriguez, infrared scope. The team followed Crichton's orders. They were fitted with Delta 7 gas masks, which came with integrated night vision lenses and radios. Rodriguez took the scope off her belt and snapped it into place. Tilda, come on, you bastards. Let's get this over with. Tilda, she had barely completed the thought when 2 gas grenades came rolling towards them. Crichton had ordered the masks because she figured that if she was in their attacker's position, a gas attack was what she would do. The grenades exploded, and the tunnel quickly filled with gas. 10 seconds later, the second wave came around the corner. =/= fire. =/= Everybody opened fire. The enemy was caught by surprise, and they quickly cut them down. There was a loud beep as A8 hit the code. The door swung open, and the gas cleared as a third wave of troops rounded the corner. Crichton signaled for them to retreat. They kept shooting as they made their way past the doors. Crichton put a small C4 charge on the keypad and set the timer to 30 seconds. She slammed the doors shut behind them. She heard them lock, followed by the charge exploding. There were screams and curses from the other side of the doors. The enemy opened fire, but she could hear their bullets bounce off the doors. =/= we need to move. It's only a matter of time before they blast through. =/= Xander said. =/= yes, we do. =/= Crichton said. =/= good work. A8 =/= thank you, Colonel. =/= She had expected an advanced complex beyond the doors. Instead, they were inside a mine. The place was being held up by a frame of wooden beams. Crichton switched her night vision off and her flashlight back on. The rest of the team quickly followed as they headed down the tunnel. Earth, Arizona Desert Mine, under Nothing 2051.09.07, 0817. Several tunnels and turns later, the mine suddenly widened into a large cave. A rope bridge connected the tunnel they had come from with another tunnel on the far side of the cave. The bridge didn't look very old. Crichton led the way across the cave and into the new tunnel. The tunnel ended at a spiral staircase. They climbed it to find another tunnel, but this one was different. As soon as they entered it, 2 rows of lights snapped on. Following them, they found a hatch to a fallout shelter. It had a wheel to open it. Crichton and Shepard opened the door, while Xander turned the wheel. The door opened, revealing a living room. They moved inside and closed the door behind them. Crichton locked it. =/= masks off. A8 and Rodriguez, stay here. Everybody else, clear the rest of the shelter. =/= It didn't take long for them to clear the shelter. Besides the living room, there were 2 rooms with bunks, 2 bathrooms, and a kitchen/mess hall. Behind the mess hall was a large pantry with enough canned food and bottled water for a couple years. Finally, there was an armory with enough rifles and pistols to arm 20 people. There were also 2 boxes full of grenades. Shepard used these to restock his supply and handed the rest to the others. "You think this is what the augments were up to down here?" Benton asked. "No, 90% of what is here is civilian gear," Xander said. "The augments had access to military-grade equipment, and this shelter is designed to hold 20 people. Even in the best-case scenario, there were 60 augments here. Worst-case scenario, there were over 100. Either way, this shelter wouldn't cut it. But it does explain why Mad Rick is here," Benton said. "This shelter has food, water, and medicine, everything he needs to recover and rebuild, and he can use this place as a base to look for whatever the augments did down here. For the record, we still don't have solid evidence that the augments were here," Shepard said. "It doesn't matter. If Mad Rick is chasing the same rumor we are, Maggie is right," Crichton said. "He'll set up shop here and go looking for the augment's secret, and if it does exist and he finds it." "Yeah, that's going to come back and bite us in the rear," Xander said. "Orders." Crichton looked around the shelter. This place was designed to survive a nuclear blast. So, what to do about it? The grenades they had found wouldn't even make a dent. Then she realized that the bunker had a gas supply for cooking. She ordered everybody out of the fallout shelter and grabbed a C4 charge, which she planted in the kitchen. Next, she opened the gas and let it flow. The timer on the charge was set to 15 minutes. Once the charge went off, the gas would ignite and turn the shelter into an inferno. The whole place would be totally useless by the time Mad Rick and his cronies found it. They made their way back to the bridge. Earth, Arizona Desert Mine under nothing 2051.09.07, 0825. When they reached the bridge, they found roughly 60 soldiers waiting for them. All of them were armed with assault rifles. Mad Rick was standing amongst them. McKinley was in his 60s, with gray hair and a distinctive gray mustache. His green eyes reflected anger. Tilda, he doesn't like the fact that we shredded some of his troops. Tilda the colonel didn't waste any time. Take aim. The soldiers did so. Before the colonel could give the order to fire, a rain of grenades came from above. Some of them exploded before they hit the ground, while the rest exploded after they did. As the explosions ripped through Mad Rick's forces, Crichton and Co. opened fire. Whoever had thrown the grenades joined in. Crichton used the chaos to take her combat knife and cut the rope bridge. McKinley ordered his troops to retreat to the tunnel. As the smoke cleared, Crichton looked up. It was only that she realized there was a ledge near the top of the cave. She figured that this ledge hid the end of another tunnel from view. Somebody had used that tunnel to catch Mad Rick and company by surprise. Her theory was confirmed when rock climbing ropes were thrown over the ledge and a group of soldiers began climbing down. There were 4 of them, and Crichton recognized their uniforms. In the chaos of the war, the federal government had not taken good care of defending the Native American reservation. So the Navajo Nation had decided that it was better to seek forgiveness than to ask permission, and created their own militia. It even had its own special operations unit, called the Navajo Arrows. The Arrows were the ones who had just saved Crichton's team. "Colonel Crichton, I presume," the team leader said. "I'm Major Peter Nez, Navajo Arrows." "Welcome to nothing. So what brings you here, Major?" Crichton said. "Besides saving you lot from Mad Rick." This got chuckles from both teams. Navajo leadership heard the same rumors as the Pentagon did, and we had a map that showed there's a fallout shelter down here. "Yeah, we found that and took care of it. Well, in about," she checked her watch. 8 minutes, boom. So what next? And how did you get in here to begin with?" "This mine has more than one entrance. We used one of the others. As for what next, there's still plenty of mine to search." Crichton nodded. She had wrecked the rope bridge and the tunnel led back to the fallout shelter, which was a ticking bomb. And it was a safe bet that Mad Rick and his troops were waiting for them down the tunnel they had used to get here to begin with. But then she realized that there was another way out of this cave. The water level in the river was low, but the passage was high enough to walk through. As she looked at the walls, an alarm bell rang in the back of her head. Up the river we go. Both units climbed down to the river and started following it. Crichton took the lead, with Shepard and Nez covering the rear. It was a good thing that the water levels were low, or moving upstream would have been exhausting. Nez inspected the tunnel walls, which were covered in watermarks. His superiors had made it clear that he was here to back up Crichton unit, and that he should let her take the lead. Those orders had made him very unhappy, but he was a professional and he had a job to do. On top of that, he was now learning firsthand that she had good instincts. Something about this river was very wrong. It took a lot of water to make a passage this big, but the river was a trickle. Tilda, why bother to build a rope bridge over this? Tilda, but if the locals had built the bridge and the fallout shelter. Tilda, then maybe it was the augments who changed the river later. Tilda, alas, there was only one way to find out what was waiting for them upstream, and Nez doubted this was the last they had seen of Mad Rick. To be continued. 2051, The Battle Over Nothing. Earth, Arizona Desert Mine, under nothing 2051.09.07, 0832. Richard McKinley was furious. He was leading his troops down one of the mine's many tunnels. They come to nothing to find a place for his troops to lick their wounds. but it had all gone horribly wrong because of Crichton and her little band of misfits. McKinley had not recognized her, but his second-in-command Lieutenant Daniels had. The lieutenant had provided him with her file. There wasn't much in it. McKinley would have ordered Daniels to find more information, but the man had been killed in the firefight at the underground river. So now he was fighting in the dark. But that was not going to stop him from crushing Crichton and her little troop. And then he would find the augment secrets of Nothing, Arizona, and make them his. Tilda, once I have them, I will retake Texas and restore it to the glorious days of the Republic. Tilda, and with the Republic, he would set his goal to taking over North America, which would be the springboard to his final goal of world domination. They reached a junction in the mine. Tilda timed to get back to work. Tilda, he turned to his troops and began giving orders. Earth, Arizona Desert Mine, under Nothing 2051.09.07, 0835. The passage carved by the river was getting narrower. It was also getting drier. They had found out that what little water was in the passage was coming from other streams that ended in the big river. As they passed their ends, the water level dropped. Crichton was in the lead, with everybody following her single file. Suddenly, the passage widened and Crichton gasped. "What the—" "Something wrong, Colonel?" Xander asked. Crichton stepped aside so that Xander could see. The wider area the group was now entering was not natural. It was a quarry. The stone mined from the quarry hadn't gone very far, because whoever had mined it had used it to build a dam that was blocking the river. Several pieces of mining equipment had been abandoned in the quarry. All of them were covered in dust. Nez walked up to a forklift and wiped away the dust to reveal a name. Cheng Industries, Inc. Cheng Industries, Incorporated had belonged to Verity Cheng, who had been an augment ruler in Asia. The Chinese had overthrown her years ago, and the company had collapsed. This had left tons of their products up for grabs by other augment leaders, which they had done with gusto. Finding this gear was a strong sign that they were in the right place. "Let's go," Crichton said. A stone flight of stairs connected the bottom of the quarry to the top of the dam. The group climbed it to find a large lake, and that lake was filled with several large concrete towers that were connected to the dam by several metal walkways, but the towers were not solid. There were grates in them. Some of them were intakes, while others were vents. This told Crichton that these towers held turbines. "It's a power source," Benton said. "But for what?" Xander asked. "Let's find out," Crichton said. The group continued down the dam. About halfway, they found a large hatch. It was not locked and opened it to find a flight of stairs that led into the dam's innards. Xander and Crichton led the way down the stairs. A well-lit concrete tunnel ended at a catwalk. The catwalk was clearly above a large empty space because Crichton could hear echoes as they stepped onto it, but the space was pitch black. Then lights began to snap on. Crichton gasped when she saw what was in the space. It was Shepard who broke the silence. "Well, I guess we found what the augments were up to." A large section of the room was filled with stasis bubbles, and inside those bubbles were babies. Crichton figured that there were at least 1,500 of them. The rest of the room was filled with all sorts of pieces of equipment. These were covered by cloth, so they couldn't see what kind of gear it was. Continuing down the catwalk, they found it ended at a metal flight of stairs down to the floor of the room. Once they got there, they began uncovering the equipment. "I've got a printing press," Benton said. "Fridges here," Xander said. "Pallets of paper," Nez began, before taking of another sheet. "And MRE." MRE stood for meal ready to eat. It was a kind of military rations. Next to a lot of bottled water. "I've got tents," Rodriguez said. "It's an escape capsule," Crichton said. "If the augments lose the war," she exchanged a look with Nez. They both knew that the augments were losing territory fast these days. "They can retreat here, an unimportant dot on the map. With everything you need to start a literal underground augment city." They spend a couple of decades down here, replenish their numbers. Right, they wait long enough to lull the world into a false sense of security. And then they come back for round 2, Nez said. So, what do we do? Benton said. Before Crichton could answer the question, there was a series of loud hisses. That was when they noticed that there were vents all over the floor. The room was being flooded with gas. Move, Crichton said. They all bolted for the entrance. But a thick blast door came up from the floor. A loud click indicated that it was locked. But nobody made it to the top of the stairs. Xander made it the furthest. He figured it was because his augment nature. But he still cursed like any base model human as the world went black. Earth, Arizona desert mine, under nothing 2051.09.07, 0842. McKinley had split his troops into 3 groups. They were exploring 3 tunnels at the same time. If Crichton and her misfit were down here, it was only a matter of time before they found them. And they turned a corner in the tunnel. There was suddenly a hissing sound. The colonel was about to bark an order when he spotted a gas grenade rolling down the tunnel. The tunnel quickly filled with gas. That caused the world to fade to black. While they didn't know it, McKinley's group was the last one to be attacked. The other 2 groups had already been taken down, and whoever had done it had been fast. They hadn't been able to send a radio message before things had gone south for the winter. Earth, Arizona Desert Augment Complex, 2051.09.07, 0915. Xander was the first to wake up. His vision was blurry at first, but he managed to blink it clear. All of their gear, including their weapons, was gone. They were locked in a room full of stasis chambers. Unlike the one in the original room, these were meant for adults. There were markings next to the chambers, which said Mark I. Tilda makes sense. The Mark I was phased out in favor of the Mark II. Tilda, it would be easy to get the surplus Mark Is on the black market. There was a single door out of the room, but Xander tried it and out it was locked. Tilda, of course it is. Tilda on the bright side, everybody was here and they were all still alive. It was only then that Xander realized something. Tilda, how did they knock out A8? Tilda the robot would have been immune to the gas. He studied the robot and found a small black disc attached to robot. He pulled it off and the robot opened its eyes. Tilda jammer. Tilda Xander dropped the disc on the floor and crushed it with his left foot. Status A8. Equals / equals fully functional. Equals / equals. Good. I can use help breaking down the door so we can escape. Equals / equals yes, Captain. Equals / equals. A8 got up and the 2 of them approached the door. Oddly enough, it was a wooden door with a doorknob that looked more at home in, well, a civilian home than an underground complex. They were about to try breaking down the door when there was a loud click. Tilda, this is too easy. Tilda, before he could make a move, the door opened and one of McKinley's soldiers came stumbling in. The woman fell as soon as she was through the door. Easy, soldier, easy. He turned to A8. Help her to her feet. Equals / equals yes, Captain. Equals / equals. A8 helped the soldier up. Based on the uniform, she was a sergeant. The sergeant blinked as she tried to clear her green eyes, but it didn't seem to have the desired effect. Name, rank, serial number, Xander said. Jones Margaret, Sergeant 2-4. She tried to continue, but her head refused to cooperate, so she took a deep breath. 248, no, not 8, 7-6. Something seemed to click in her head. 5, it was 5. Jones Margaret, Sergeant, serial number 245. Again. Jones repeated the sentence as if it was her own personal mantra. After a few times, her delivery became better. Her head was clearing. At the same time, Crichton and the rest of her team began to stir. Tilda good, looks like they were only knocked out. Tilda, as Crichton opened her eyes, Jones managed to stand on her own. Xander decided that now was a good time to push for answers. So, Sergeant, How did you end up here? The same as you. Somebody gassed us. I was looking for an exit, but all I found was you and more stasis tubes. More stasis tubes? So the room you woke up in is… More of this, Jones gestured towards the room. Yes, sir, I have a bad feeling about who were in these tubes before. She paused. And our room is much bigger than this one. I figure this where the brass was in stasis, while our room was for the grunts. What about your gear? All gone. Not all of it, Benton said. The medical supplies are still here. She had managed to inject herself with an emergency stimulant pen. I have enough for everybody in this room. We should check if McKinley's medic has more. Sounds like a plan, Xander began. Make it happen. Benton set to work. After they were injected, everybody checked their pockets. At first glance, it appeared that whoever had gassed them had gotten all their gear, but they had gotten sloppy with A8. All of the robot exterior weapons and gear were gone. His torso, however, had a hidden compartment for this kind of situation. It had 2 pistols and 6 clips of ammo. Crichton took one and Xander the other. Benton also found 2 scalpels in her medical kit and taped them together. Then she hid the makeshift weapon up her right sleeve. Ready, Crichton said, getting nods from everybody, including Jones. Go. Crichton opened the door and led the charge through. Like Jones had said, the room was bigger. There was no sign of whoever had been in the stasis chambers. The only people there were McKinley forces. Benton found the colonel's medic, a male captain with a name tag that said Williams. She injected him, and soon they were working on waking the rest of McKinley people. Meanwhile, Crichton and Xander searched for another way out of the room. Alas, the only other exit was a set of heavy metal doors, and those were locked. We're on breaking those down any time soon, Crichton said. Before Xander could reply, Benton shouted for Crichton. They had found Colonel McKinley. The man had been shot 3 times in the torso. Benton and Williams had examined the colonel, but there had been nothing they could do. McKinley's troops were gathered in one corner of the room, talking amongst themselves. It appeared that they were figuring out who was in charge now. How long? Xander asked. From the looks of it, he was shot while we were all out, Williams said. Williams was an African man in his 40s, with graying hair and a clean-shaven face. He took a deep breath, then turned his attention to the troops. Despite outranking Lieutenant Daniels, Williams had not been part of the chain of command of McKinley's forces. He had only been given the rank of captain so that he could put his foot down when it came to medical matters. But now that McKinley and Daniels were both dead, he closest thing to a commanding officer the Texans had left. Attention. All the troops snapped to attention. Okay, troops, I'm not going to beat around the bush. The colonel is dead, and so is his cause. Hell, most of us were drafted into this moronic farce at gunpoint, so you need to decide what you're loyal to. There were mutters, but Williams kept going. Your family and friends, or the demented dream of a dead madman, and you need to decide now, because we're in an augment bunker and it's do or die. The floor was dusty, and he drew a line with his foot. If you pick McKinley and his crazy dream, stay there. If you want your life back, come to this side of the line. There was an awkward silence. Then the first soldier walked across the line. In the end, there were only 3 soldiers left on the other side of the line. 2 men and 1 woman. It was Private Ariana Hendricks who spoke up. She was an African-American woman in her 30s. You will pay for this betrayal. She turned to the other 2. Let's go. The 3 of them went into the room where Crichton and company had woken up. Crichton had no idea what they were planning to do there, and she didn't care. Even with what remained of McKinley's forces on their side, the number of stasis chambers in the room made it clear that we're probably severely outnumbered and outgunned by the augments. But first, they had to escape from this room. Studying the place, she noticed an air vent attached to the ceiling. It seemed to run through the whole complex. Shepard, she pointed up, can we use that? I wouldn't, Colonel, Shepard began. You see the brackets and the pins connecting the vent to the ceiling? I'm no engineer, but I've made enough repairs to Olivia to know that those pins will snap like a twig if you put anything heavier than a rat in those vents. A fall from that height will break your neck. Yeah, I figured as much. Colonel, Shepard lowered his voice. Why did they lock us in here, and why sedative gas? They could have killed us. No, they can't. At least not yet. The augments running this place need to know who knows we're here, who we report to, and if the feds are about to come breaking down their door. She paused. There are probably hidden cameras all over the place, allowing them to listen to every word we say. So, what do we do now? Crichton was about to answer when Nez got her attention with a hand signal. She walked over to him and saw that he had found a hatch in the floor. Tilda, it can't be that easy. Tilda Nez opened the hatch, revealing a maintenance area underneath the stasis chambers. There were small passages, but the bulk of the space was filled by machinery. And that machinery was loud. Tilda, even if there's no way out down there, it should give us some options. Tilda, she began giving orders. Earth, Arizona Desert, Augment Complex. Control Room 2051.09.07, 0932. Verity Cheng watched as Colonel Crichton and several of her people dropped down into the maintenance area under Stasis Room B. Tilda, clever girl. Tilda, she and her group were doing much better than Private Ariana Hendricks and her 2 cohorts had done. They had attempted to escape through an air vent from Stasis Room A, but the vent had not held their weight, and they had ended up falling from the ceiling of the embryo stasis room. They had been found with their necks broken by the fall. Getting back to Crichton and company, the maintenance area not only lacked cameras, the hidden microphones throughout the stasis room were useless because of the noise the machinery made. Tilda, time for Plan B. Tilda, until now, Cheng had been watching the action from a chair that stood facing a bank of monitors. But not only did Crichton know exactly what she wanted, she had made it clear that she had no intention of making it easy. Cheng stood up and began ordering her people around. To be continued. 2051, the battle over nothing. Earth, Arizona Desert, Augment Complex. Stasis Room B 2051.09.07, 0936. The heavy metal doors opened, and Cheng's troops charged through. They were armed with assault rifles and riddled the room with bullets, but they didn't hit any of Crichton's group. The stasis chambers were arranged in towers of 5 units. While the maintenance area allowed for maintenance of the lower units, it was useless for the tops unit, so there were ladders that allowed access to the top ones. Crichton's group had climbed those ladders and lay flat on top of the towers. While Cheng had preparing for her charge, Crichton had given her pistol to A8. She knew that the robot and Xander were best shots her force had. The augment forces had made the mistake of not wearing helmets, so the 2 of them aimed for the heads of the targets. By the time they ran out of ammunition, dozens of the enemy soldiers had been killed. It was at this point that Verity Cheng stepped into view. Cheng appeared to be in her 30s, with Asian features. Her black hair was in a pixie cut. "Bravo, Colonel Crichton," Cheng said, "but I know you are out of ammunition. And I can flood this room with poison gas whenever I want to, so show yourself." Tilda, the game is afoot. Tilda Xander watched as Crichton left the maintenance area. But he knew that Major Nez and Captain Williams were still down there. He looked at this watch. Tilda 10, 9, 8. Tilda, as Crichton and Cheng came face to face, a nasty-looking green gas began rising from the hatch to maintenance area. Tilda, the coolant is leaking as planned. Tilda, the gas used to cool the stasis chambers, was heavier than air, so the gas essentially stuck to the floor. Nez and Williams had punctured the lines as Crichton had ordered. Cheng, however, was a sharp cookie. "Ah, the cooling gas. You know that it's toxic and whoever is down there will suffocate," she said. "I know," Crichton began. "I also know it's very combustible. 1 spark and boom." What Cheng didn't know was that Nez and Williams were fine. Benton and Williams had each had one emergency oxygen tank in their supplies. They only had enough air for 20 minutes, but it was enough. By the time they ran out of air, the fog on the ground would be so thick that not even augments would be able to see them. "So what's your plan? Stall for time and then light a match," Cheng smiled. "Even if you pull it off, you'll never take out all of my forces, you'll still be slaughtered." "What do you want?" "You know what I want to know. You said it yourself." Cheng stepped closer to Crichton, putting her in hand-to-hand combat range. "Who do you report to? Who knows you're here? You can tell me now, or we will torture it out of you. And if you don't give us the answers we need, one of your troops will." Before Xander could even blink, Cheng grabbed Crichton in a chokehold. "Tell me what I want to know, or I'll rip out your throat." Before Crichton could say anything, something flew through the air and drove itself into the back of his neck. Xander realized that Benton had thrown a pair of taped-together scalpels into Cheng's flesh. Cheng pulled the scalpels out, which gave Crichton her opening. First, she elbowed the augment leader, then bit her in the hand. Cheng screamed while trying to regain her hold on Crichton's neck, but then 3 loud booms echo through the room. 3 red spots began to form on Cheng's clothes, before her eyes rolled back in her head, and she fell to the floor, dead as a doornail. "Tilda, what the? We were out of ammo." Tilda, but then he remembered that A8 had magnets in his hands. The assault rifles themselves were mostly plastic, but the ammo clips were old-fashioned metal. A8 had dangled his arm over the tower and snatched up one of the rifles. There had only been 3 rounds left in the clip, but it had been enough to finish Cheng. A second wave of augment troops rushed into the room, but it was too late. Nez and Williams came from the maintenance area. Nez grabbed a grenade from one of the dead augments. Nez, Williams, and Crichton climbed just far enough to get out of the layer of gas. Then Nez threw the grenade. It exploded, and the coolant ignited. The entire augment group was incinerated in the blast. "Yikes," Shepard said. "Arm up, people. Strip the corpses. This is far from over," Crichton said. The group climbed down, and they got to work. The battle over nothing was about to start in earnest. Earth, Arizona Desert Augment Complex. Control Room 2051.09.07, 0945. Samuel Zhukov was 45 years old, with black hair and green eyes. He had been Cheng's second-in-command, which meant that he was now running the complex. The base models, which was what he called normal humans, were fighting room to room. While his troops were keeping the enemy busy, the maintenance team was busy swapping out the gas tanks. When they were done, the augments would retreat, and they would flood the rooms with the base models with poison gas. And that would be the end of it. But then his plan went off the rails as the colonel and her people found the armory. This was where they had locked away the base models' gear. One of them, the captain called Xander, broke down the door. Tilda blast. Tilda, the armory, was where they kept the supply of gas masks, which rendered his plan useless. This had just become an old-fashioned war of attrition. Earth, Arizona Desert Augment Complex, Corridor 2051.09.07, 0950. Crichton gave Shepard and Rodriguez the hand signal to enter the next room. They had their gear back, including their gas masks with their built-in radios. But she didn't want the enemy to overhear her orders, so they went with the hand signals instead. So far, they had been clearing small rooms. This kept the enemy from crushing them with superior numbers. There simply wasn't enough space. But sooner or later, they would reach the large chamber where the embryos were kept, and that would be the deciding moment of the fight. Shepard and Rodriguez charged into the room as ordered. It was the complex library. Fortunately, all they found inside were books, so they kept moving. 4 rooms later, they reached another corridor. This one had a window that provided them with a grand view of the embryo room. Tilda, time to earn your paycheck. Tilda, the window was near the top of the grand chamber, but the corridor did not connect to the doors where they had originally entered the large chamber. Instead, it connected to a separate flight of stairs. They had not seen this flight earlier because they had been gassed before getting that far into the room. This time, Crichton had no intention of letting go of the high ground. She signaled to Nez. The arrows took out their climbing ropes and attached grappling hooks to them. Their assault rifles came with integrated launchers, so getting the hooks to where they needed was not a problem. In the meantime, Benton and Rodriguez studied the doors. There was a pair of hydraulics engines. This was how the augments had slammed shut the doors the first time. They set to sabotaging the devices. By time they were done, Nez and his team had secured their ropes. The other entrance/catwalk was lower than the one they were on, so the team could easily sail over. While they kept that platform secure, half of the McKinley folks followed them. Besides the two entrances they had just secured, there was only one way in or out of the chamber. A set of wooden doors located halfway between the two entrances. This was the room's only lower entrance. Now the ball was in the augment's court. Earth, Arizona Desert Augment Complex, Corridor 2051.09.07-0955. Zhukov had split his forces into 3 groups. One would enter through the lower entrance, and the other 2 would attack the 2 base model positions directly. It would be a short, but very satisfying fight. He would lead the charge against Crichton's position himself. Reaching their starting point, he signaled his troops, and they rushed towards Crichton's position. The corridor lit up with weapons, both sides opened fired. They took down several of Crichton's people, but were hit by grenades in return. Zhukov watched as at least 8 of his soldiers were blasted to pieces by the explosives. The base models were putting up a stiff fight, but it was that was as far he got before the corridor was rattled by a heavy explosion. What Crichton and Williams knew, but Zhukov didn't, was that McKinley's Abrams tank had been abandoned on the surface. And that tank had been spotted by an Army satellite. Combined with the damage it had done to the town, it had sent up a red flag in the Pentagon. On top of that, Crichton's unit had not checked in since arriving in nothing, and neither had the arrows. But the straw that had broken the camel's back was the explosion of the fallout shelter. So the Pentagon had called the Navajo Militia Command. The militia's supply of gear was a scraped-together bunch old surplus equipment, but it was still capable of doing a ton of damage. =/back/= what the hell? =/back/= Crichton asked. =/back/= why are parts of the ceiling coming down? =/back/= =/back/= sounds like Crazy Hank. =/back/= Nez answered. =/back/= who is Crazy Hank? =/back/= =/back/= Colonel Hendrik Chi is the commander of our artillery unit. Very capable, very deadly, and more than a little of his rocker. =/back/= Zhukov cursed. He was nowhere near Crichton and whoever she was talking to, but he had overheard the whole conversation. This meant that the location of his bunker was now out in the world. Even if they killed all the base model troops, their long-term plan was ruined. More chunks of ceiling came down. At the same time, the enemy was making a push. They backed it up with another wave of grenades. Zhukov was about to give another set of orders when a chunk of ceiling ended his command. Earth, Arizona Desert Augment Complex, Embryo Chamber 2051.09.07-1007. The fight was not going well. Her people were giving as good as they got, Tilda making every shot count, but even with Crazy Hank's help, the numbers were not on their side. Benton and Williams were doing their best to threat the wounded, but they could only do so much. They needed to make a move and make it fast, and then she spotted something on the floor. She untied one of the ropes that Nez and the others had used to cross. "Cover me," Crichton said. "Be careful, Indy," Xander said with a grin. She jumped off the catwalk and swung to the floor, landing and rolling. She had ended up next to the pallets with supplies. They had found fridges amongst the supplies, and in order to stay under the radar, The augments had scraped together old models. Models that ran on some pretty nasty chemicals. Because they were in storage, the chemicals were not in the fridges. Instead, they were loaded in special tanks loaded on another pallet. Crichton sent one of the tanks rolling towards the augment forces while puncturing it with weapons fire. The chemicals did exactly what she hoped they would. Some of them began choking, while others rushed to put on their gas masks. But the chaos gave Nez and the arrows the edge they needed. By the third tank, however, the plan had stopped working. So Shepard threw a grenade into the chemical-covered mess. Like before, there was a fireball that took out several augment troops. At the same time, Nez charged down the stairs and provided cover fire. Between him and Crichton, 8 more enemy soldiers went down. As Nez joined Crichton, the biggest impact so far hit. =/== oh no, he didn't =/== Crichton gave Nez a surprised look. =/== the military museum had this really big, really old, really nasty German naval gun. =/== Nez shot another augment soldier. =/== the projectiles are heavier than you and me together. =/== 2 more artillery shots followed. Then somebody shouted an order to retreat. The augment forces didn't waste any time bugging out. Somebody tried to activate the gas protocol, but the sabotage had done its work and the doors didn't close. Crichton and Nez made their way up the nearest flight of stairs. Crichton cursed. The arrows had made it, but only a handful of McKinley's people had survived. =/== Xander, regroup at my position. =/== Crichton said. =/== yes, Colonel. =/== Xander's group made their way to her location. She didn't like this situation one bit. The augments should have realized that the gas protocols didn't work and attacked again. So where are they, Tilda? Xander's group began climbing the stairs to her position, but there was still no sign of the enemy. And then she realized something. =/== oh, crap. =/== =/== what? =/== Shepard asked. =/== we broke the coolant system. We presumed it only cooled the stasis chambers, but what if it also cooled key components of the power station, keeping this whole thing ticking over? =/== and crazy Hank blasting holes into the place probably wasn't helping either. =/== it's a hydroelectric plant. =/== Rodriguez asked. =/== how would that even work? =/== who cares? =/== Crichton asked. =/== if we're still in here when this place blows, we're toast. We need to move now. =/== The survivors headed down the corridor that Crichton and company had originally used to enter the complex. They reached the stairs back to the top of the dam as the first explosion rang through the complex. Going down the river was suicide. Once the dam broke, the water would rush down the passage and drown anybody inside. The hatch was located in the middle of the dam, so they had never gotten to the far end of it. Now, Crichton spotted that there was a flight of stairs that they had not noticed before. That way. Making their way down the stairs, they found a dock with a barge tied to it. This was how the augments had gotten all the mining equipment to the quarry. Fortunately, the barge was fitted with 3 outboard engines. The group boarded the barge, and Xander started the engines. Soon, the barge was making their way across the reservoir. On the other side of the reservoir, the river narrowed to a passage again. They were entering it when the dam broke. The water levels began to drop, but they were far enough away to keep going. A couple minutes later, the passage widened. There was another dock, next a flight of stairs up to a hatch. Xander brought the barge up to the dock and Crichton secured it. The group disembarked and began climbing the stairs. Earth, Arizona desert, outside of nothing 2051.09.07, 1020. Crichton had split her forces into 3 groups. Her own force was Group 1, the Arrows and half of McKinley's troops were Group 2, and the rest of McKinley's people led by Williams were Group 3. Crichton unit were headed for their helicopter, Olivia. So far, they hadn't run into any augments' forces. They reached Olivia. 2 dead augments lay next to the helicopter. "Looks like the anti-theft system did its job," Shepard said. "Start her up," Xander said. Shepard nodded and unlocked the helicopter, while rest of the unit covered him. 2 minutes later, Olivia was up in the air. Shepard flew the helicopter around nothing because the artillery fire was still ongoing. Crichton took a pair of binoculars out of the helicopter's supply locker and began looking for the enemy. She didn't find them, but she did spot Group 2. They had found McKinley's Abrams tank and were using it. The tank had room for 4 people, so the rest of the group had to follow behind on foot. She also spotted Group 3, who were moving parallel to Group 2. "Come on, where are you?" she said. "Colonel," Benton said, "at 2 o'clock. Crichton turned and spotted what Benton had seen. In the middle of the desert was a hatch surrounded by several corpses. Xanders brought the other 2 groups up to speed, who made the hatch their new destination. At same time, Shepard turned Olivia to put her on course for the hatch as well. That was when Crichton spotted the augment forces. They were in a convoy that was a mix of Humvees and motorbikes. She turned to Shepard. "Missiles." Shepard nodded. Olivia was armed with 2 pods of 4 missiles and 3 machine guns. The first 2 were Door's guns, and the last was mounted under the nose. Shepard fired 2 of the missiles, destroying the convoy's lead vehicles. This caused the convoy to break and scatter. In the chaos, Shepard picked a target and made a strafing run. At the same time, Xander and Rodriguez opened fire with Door guns. The result was devastating. The targeted Humvee exploded, while at least a dozen enemy soldiers were shot as Olivia passed. Shepard turned the helicopter for another pass, allowing Crichton to see the Abrams coming into view. Nez had left the walking troops behind and pushed the tanks to at maximum speed. While it was technically off-road, the desert here was flat enough for it to make 50 kilometers an hour. And with the air attack, that was enough for the tank to catch up. Nez and his arrows didn't waste any time putting the main gun to work. But Crichton didn't get to see how much targets they hit, because one of the augments fired a rocket-propelled grenade at them. Shepard dodged the grenade, then took out the augment with the launcher with the nose gun. "Tilda, he's not getting up." Tilda, the helicopter, swung around again. Below them, the augment forces were in complete disarray. Then more Humvees came into view. "Tilda augments reinforcements, Tilda." Then she realized something. The augments had probably stashed away enough Humvees for all of their people. But because some of their people had been killed in fighting in the complex, they had been forced to leave some of them behind. In the rush to get out, they had forgotten to sabotage them, which had allowed the rest of Group 2 and Group 3 to get themselves some wheels. Her theory was confirmed when the Humvees parked behind the Abrams and Williams, and his people jumped out. They opened fire on the augment forces. Later, Earth, Arizona ruins of the augment complex, 2104.05.01. The battle over nothing had been over 5 minutes after Williams and his troops had arrived. 2 minutes after that, the bulk of the augment complex had either collapsed or exploded. The only part of the base to survive was the embryo chamber. For the past 53 years, the U.S. Army had guarded the embryos while politicians bickered about what to do with them. But the one thing they did agree on was that they should be locked away someplace more secure, and now that was a practical option. Major General Alexander Xander had been picked to oversee the operation. One of the perks being an augment was a long lifespan, so he still felt young and fit, despite now being decades older. Around him, soldiers were carefully removing the stasis bubbles. They would be taken up to a pair of J-class freighters, belonging to the freshly formed Earth Cargo Authority. The 2 freighters would be guarded by 36 soldiers each. They would take the embryos to another solar system, where a new space station called Cold Station 12 would become their home. Of course, the people at Cold Station 12 would not be told where they came from. Officially, these embryos had been gathered from all over Earth. The authorities didn't want nothing, Arizona to become some kind of augment shrine. That was also why they had rewritten the official history. As far as the world would know, the battle over nothing had been more than a minor skirmish over an insignificant dot on the map. Tilda over 1,800 embryos. This is so going to come back to bite them. Tilda, but time would tell if he was right about it. For now, he had a job to do, so he got to work.